3 years of war, 150,000 deaths, 2.5 million refugees, and no solution in sight. The intensity of the Syrian crisis has exceeded all forecasts and is still far from over. How to explain such a situation? How did the popular uprising of spring 2011 become a major bloodbath? To understand the crisis, you have to look at it on 3 different levels. First, the Syrian conflict is a civil war. On the one hand, the rebels, mostly Sunnis, the biggest community in Syria. They occupy the north, Damascus suburbs, and countrysides in the south and the center of the country. On the other hand, the loyalists, who rely on the Alawite sect, a branch of Shia Islam, of which the Assad clan is part of. They control the big cities, including the capital, and the seafront, mostly populated by Alawites. The pro-regime forces recently took over the Kalamoun mountain near Lebanon. The insurgents retaliated, invading north of Latakia. Elsewhere, the front line remains more or less stable. But quickly, multiple countries took advantage of this civil war, and Syria became a battlefield by proxy. The first players of this globalization are the Western superpowers supporting the rebels. The United States and big European countries back up the Syrian National Coalition, the main anti-Assad organization. The SNC was born in late 2012 and is admitted as the only representative of the Syrian people by around 100 countries. But Western supports, mostly diplomatic, never helped the SNC to become a structure able to replace the Assad regime. Fundings are too low, weapons delivery too slow, and the US have always refused the option of a military intervention, even after the chemical attacks in Damascus in August 2013. On the other side, there are the Assad supporters, China and Russia. They are both members of the UN Security Council, and they both blocked 3 of its resolutions against the regime. Besides, Moscow constantly supplies the Syrian army. Russia has several interests in this crisis. Economic interests, because the Assad regime is an old client for the Russian military industry. Strategic interests, because the Tartus Harbor is the last Russian access to the Mediterranean Sea. And finally, geopolitical interests, because back in 2011, the Kremlin didn't appreciate the NATO intervention in Libya, which was supposed to only protect civilians, but finally ended with the fall of Gaddafi. Today, Vladimir Putin really doesn't want this kind of event to happen again, especially right in his sphere of influence, which Syria is part of. And this is how the anti-Assad uprising became part of a new kind of struggle between East and West. The third stakeholders in the Syrian conflict are the Sunni monarchies of the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia, for instance, sees in the Syrian crisis a way to weaken its archenemy, Iran. The Shiite giant is the first ally of Syria in the Middle East. This is why Saudi Arabia and Qatar delivered weapons to rebel squad through Jordan and Turkey. Besides, several Salafi sheikhs settled in Kuwait set up donation systems to help the rebellion. But over time, sponsors from the Gulf began to support increasingly radical rebel groups like Al-Nusra Front or Ahrar al-Sham, which are close to Al-Qaeda. Up north, the Turkish government also played with fire by letting militias of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant pass through its territory. To face the Sunni forces, Assad can rely on his Shiite allies, the fourth players in the conflict. Iran brings to Damascus money, weapons, and military advisors. There is also the Shiite Lebanese militia, Hezbollah. At the beginning of the conflict, their fighters were just patrolling along the Syrian border. But they ended up fighting directly alongside the Syrian army. It's the same for Iraq's Shiite militias. At first, they were only supposed to protect the Sayyida Zainab mausoleum, and now they are dispatched all over the country, especially in Aleppo. And this is how Syria became the core of a new episode in the old conflict between Shiites and Sunnis. Let's sum up the situation. Civil war, Cold War, Holy War. The Syrian conflict is a mix of local, regional, and international issues. A puzzle that seems for now very hard to solve.